The scream tore from Helena Lawson's throat, as her husband's hands shoved her backward into the howling darkness, the blizzard swallowing her whole before she could catch her breath or beg him to stop. The door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the bolt slide home with a finality that turned her blood to ice even before the wind cut through her thin cotton dress. She had known Malcolm was cruel, had felt the sting of his palm across her face more times than she could count during their 2 years of marriage, but she had never imagined he would do this. Never imagined he would throw her out into a storm that had already buried half of Nevada, Missouri under 3 feet of snow, with more falling so thick she could barely see her own hands as she raised them to pound against the door. "Malcolm, please." Her voice cracked as the wind stole the words from her lips. "Let me back in. I am sorry. Whatever I did, I am sorry." But there was only silence from within the small cabin they had shared since moving to this God-forsaken town 6 months ago. Helena had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a merchant who had lost everything in a bad business deal. When Malcolm Lawson had come calling with his promises of a fresh start out west and a home of their own, her father had practically pushed her into the marriage. She had been 18 then, naive enough to believe that any life would be better than watching her family starve. Malcolm had been handsome in a sharp-featured way, 25 years old with ambitions of making his fortune in the cattle trade. But the mask had slipped within weeks of their wedding. The man she had married was a drunk, a gambler, and a coward who took out every frustration on the woman who had no choice but to share his bed. Tonight, she had made the mistake of questioning why he had lost another week's wages at the saloon. That was all it had taken. He had backhanded her so hard she had tasted blood, and when she had dared to cry, he had dragged her to the door and thrown her out into the storm that had been raging since sunset. Helena stumbled away from the cabin as the cold bit through her dress and into her bones. She wore no coat, no shoes beyond the thin house slippers that were already soaked through. Her dark hair, which she had worn pinned up, came loose in the wind and whipped across her face, strands freezing to her cheeks. She tried to think, tried to force her mind to work past the terror and the cold. The nearest neighbor was the widow Johnson, but her place was half a mile down the road, and Helena could barely see 5 feet in front of her face. The snow was already past her ankles, and every step forward felt like wading through quicksand. She had to try. If she stayed here, if she just sat down and waited for Malcolm to come to his senses and let her back in, she would die. Some part of her understood that with perfect clarity. So Helena wrapped her arms around herself and began to walk, following what she hoped was the road. The wind screamed in her ears, and the snow pelted her face like tiny needles. Her feet went numb within minutes, and then her hands, and then the numbness began to spread up her legs and arms in a way that was almost a relief, because at least it did not hurt anymore. She did not know how long she walked. Time lost all meaning in the white chaos of the blizzard. She fell twice, maybe 3 times, and each time it was harder to get back up. Her thoughts began to scatter like leaves in the wind. She thought of her mother, who had died when Helena was 12. She thought of her little sister, who had been sent to live with an aunt in Chicago. She thought of all the dreams she had once had for her life, all the foolish, girlish dreams of love and happiness that seemed like jokes now. When she fell the final time, Helena could not find the strength to rise. She lay in the snow, and it was almost warm now, almost soft like a feather bed. She thought perhaps she would just rest here for a moment, just close her eyes for a minute, and then she would get up and keep walking. But her eyes were so heavy, and the darkness that crept in at the edges of her vision was so inviting. She let herself sink into it, let herself drift away from the cold and the pain and the bitter disappointment of her short life. She did not hear the horse's hooves muffled by the snow. She did not see the rider who nearly trampled her before his mount shied and refused to go forward. She did not feel the strong arms that lifted her from the snowbank, or the curses the man uttered when he felt how cold her skin had become. Dalton Ellis had been riding for the Johnson Ranch when the storm hit, trying to get the last of the pregnant heifers into shelter before the worst of it arrived. He had thought he knew every inch of this territory after 3 years of working these lands, but the blizzard had turned the familiar landscape into an alien world. He had been trying to find his way back to the bunkhouse when his horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Smoke, had suddenly planted his feet and refused to move forward. Dalton had been about to spur him on when he had seen the dark shape in the snow, nearly buried already. His first thought had been that someone had lost a calf, but when he had dismounted and brushed away the snow, his heart had nearly stopped. It was a woman, small and dark-haired and so cold that her lips had turned blue. For a terrible moment he had thought she was dead, but when he had pressed his fingers to her throat, he had felt the faintest flutter of a pulse. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, stripping off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapping it around her. She did not stir, did not respond at all when he lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and even through the coat he could feel how her body had gone rigid with cold. He knew enough about winter to know what that meant. She was hypothermic, probably had been out here for a while, and if he did not get her warm soon, she would die. The Johnson place was too far, and he had no idea where this woman had come from or how she had ended up in the middle of a blizzard in nothing but a dress. But there was a lined shack about a quarter-mile to the east, a small shelter the ranch hands used during cattle drives. If he could get her there, if he could get a fire going, maybe he could save her. Dalton hauled himself back into the saddle with the woman cradled against his chest and urged Smoke forward. The horse, sensing the urgency, pushed through the drifts with determination. Every minute felt like an hour, and Dalton found himself talking to the unconscious woman, willing her to hold on. "Come on now, stay with me. You are going to be fine, just stay with me." He did not know if she could hear him. He did not know if it made any difference. But he kept talking anyway, because the alternative was to acknowledge that she might already be too far gone. The lined shack materialized out of the storm like a miracle, its rough log walls dark against the white. Dalton nearly fell getting down from his horse, his own limbs stiff with cold despite his layers of clothing. He kicked the door open and carried the woman inside, laying her on the single narrow cot that occupied one corner. The shack was barely bigger than a horse stall with a small potbelly stove, a few supplies on a shelf and nothing else. But it was shelter, and that was what mattered. His hands shook as he built a fire in the stove, using the kindling and wood that he and the other hands always kept stocked. It seemed to take forever for the flames to catch, but finally they did, and he fed them until they roared. Then he turned his attention back to the woman. She had not moved. Her skin was still that terrible gray-white color, and her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her chest rise and fall. Dalton had pulled men out of the river before, had seen what happened when someone got too cold, and he knew that warming her up too fast could be as dangerous as leaving her frozen. But he also knew that she was in immediate danger of dying if he did not do something. He stripped off her soaked dress with hands that tried to be gentle and impersonal, though he felt like a bastard for undressing an unconscious woman. But the fabric was frozen stiff in places, and she would never get warm with it clinging to her skin. Underneath, she wore a thin chemise that was just as wet. He removed that too, trying not to look, trying to focus on the task at hand. There was a blanket in his saddlebag, and he wrapped her in it, then covered her with the 2 rough wool blankets from the cot. But she was still so cold. Her pulse was thready and irregular, and her skin felt like touching marble. Dalton had heard stories from old trappers about how to treat hypothermia, and they all said the same thing: skin-to-skin contact. Body heat was the fastest way to warm someone up when they were this far gone. He hesitated for only a moment before he began stripping off his own wet clothes. This was not about modesty or propriety. This was about saving her life. When he was down to his long underwear, he slipped under the blankets beside her and pulled her against him. The cold of her body was shocking even through the thin fabric that separated them. It was like embracing a corpse, and for a terrible moment, Dalton wondered if he had been too late. But then he felt that faint heartbeat against his chest, and he wrapped his arms tighter around her, willing his warmth into her frozen flesh. "Come on," he murmured against her hair. "Come back. Fight." He began to rub her arms and back, trying to stimulate circulation. He pulled her legs up against his, trying to warm her feet, which were like blocks of ice. The fire in the stove crackled and popped, slowly heating the small space, but it was not enough. She needed more. Dalton tilted her face up and saw that her lips were still that awful blue color. He remembered something else the trappers had said, something about breathing warm air into the lungs. He had thought it was nonsense at the time, an old wives' tale. But what did he have to lose? He covered her mouth with his and breathed out slowly, filling her lungs with his breath. Once, twice, 3 times. He did not know if it would help, but he had to try everything. Between breaths, he kept rubbing her arms, her back, her legs, anywhere he could reach, trying to bring blood back to the surface. "Breathe," he commanded. "Damn it, breathe." And then, like a miracle, he felt her chest expand on its own. A shudder ran through her body and a small sound escaped her throat. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open, but it was something. It was life. Dalton kept working, kept breathing for her when her own breaths grew too shallow, kept rubbing warmth back into her limbs. Slowly, so slowly that he almost did not notice at first, color began to return to her face. The terrible gray-white faded to pale cream, and then a faint pink touched her cheeks. Her breathing grew stronger, deeper, more regular. Her heart beat more firmly against his chest. He did not know how long he held her like that, his body wrapped around hers, breathing life back into her frozen form. The storm raged outside, but inside the little shack, the fire burned and the woman began to live again. It was perhaps an hour later when her eyes finally opened. They were blue, he saw, a deep blue like a summer sky. They stared at him in confusion and fear, and she tried to pull away. "Easy," Dalton said quickly. "You are safe. I found you in the snow. You nearly died." She stopped struggling, but the fear did not leave her eyes. "Where am I?" "Line shack on the Johnson Ranch, about 2 miles east of Nevada. I am Dalton Ellis. I work here, Nevada." She seemed to be trying to piece things together. "The storm, Malcolm, he—" Her voice broke and tears began to slide down her cheeks. "Someone threw you out in that." Dalton felt anger surge through him. "In a blizzard," she nodded, her face crumpling. "My husband, I made him angry. I did not mean to, but I made him angry and he threw me out and I tried to find help, but I could not see and it was so cold." "Your husband." Dalton had to force the words out past the rage that choked him. "Your husband threw you into a blizzard. It was my fault," she whispered. "I should not have questioned him about the money. Like hell it was your fault." Dalton realized he was holding her tighter than he should, and he forced himself to relax his grip. "What kind of man throws his wife out to die in a storm? What is his name?" "Malcolm. Malcolm Lawson. We live in that cabin on the north edge of town, the one with the blue door." Her voice was so small, so defeated. "I should go back. When the storm clears, I should go back. He will be worried." "The hell you will." The words came out harder than Dalton intended, and he saw her flinch. He gentled his voice. "I am sorry, but madam, you nearly died. If my horse had not stopped, if I had not seen you, you would be buried under 3 feet of snow right now. And you want to go back to the man who did that to you. He is my husband. That does not give him the right to kill you." She was quiet for a long moment, and Dalton could feel the trembling in her body that had nothing to do with cold. "I have nowhere else to go. We will figure something out. But first, you need to rest and get your strength back." He became aware, suddenly, of how improper their current situation was. He was in his underclothes, she was naked beneath the blankets, and they were pressed together in a way that would ruin her reputation if anyone found out. "I am sorry about this, but you were so cold. I had to get you warm somehow." A faint flush touched her cheeks. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would do." "No." She met his eyes, and there was something fierce in her gaze now, something that pushed past the fear and the defeat. "Not anyone. Malcolm would have left me there. Most people would have ridden right past in a storm like that. You stopped. You saved me. And you gave me your coat and your warmth, and you did not." She trailed off, seeming to search for words. "You did not take advantage." Dalton felt heat rise in his own face. "That would make me no better than the bastard who put you out there." Most men would not see it that way. She was quiet for another moment. "My name is Helena Lawson. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Lawson, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I." She closed her eyes, and he felt her body relax slightly against his. "I am so tired." "Then sleep. You are safe here, I promise." "I believe you," she murmured, and the trust in those words hit him harder than any blow. Within moments, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Dalton lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. He had been working on the Johnson ranch for 3 years, ever since he had left his family's failing farm in Kansas. He was 27 years old, and in all that time, he had never held a woman like this. There had been a girl back home, but she had married someone else while he was away. There had been the occasional visit to the saloon, but nothing that meant anything. He had told himself he was not the marrying kind, that he was too restless, too focused on saving enough money to buy his own land someday. But now, holding this broken, brave woman in his arms, feeling the life flowing back into her, something shifted in his chest. Something he had not known was missing clicked into place. He told himself it was just the circumstances, the intensity of pulling someone back from death's door. He told himself he would feel the same about anyone he had saved, but he knew, even then, that he was lying to himself. When he finally slept, he dreamed of blue eyes and dark hair, and of someone worth fighting for. He woke to find pale gray light filtering through the gaps in the walls, and the storm still howling outside, though perhaps not as fiercely as before. Helena was still asleep in his arms, but her breathing was strong and her skin was warm. He carefully extricated himself from the blankets and dressed quickly in his half-dried clothes, then added more wood to the fire. His stomach growled, reminding him that he had not eaten since noon the day before, and he checked the supplies on the shelf. There was coffee, some hardtack, and a few cans of beans. Not much, but it would do. He was heating water for coffee when Helena stirred. She sat up slowly, clutching the blankets to her chest, and looked around the small shack with confusion that quickly cleared into memory. "Good morning," Dalton said, keeping his voice gentle. "How do you feel?" "Like I was beaten and frozen and left for dead." She tried to smile, but it did not quite reach her eyes. "My dress. I had to take it off. It was soaking wet. I hung it by the fire, and it is mostly dry now." He turned his back to give her privacy. There is not much in the way of breakfast, but I have coffee and beans if you are hungry." "Coffee sounds wonderful." He heard the rustle of fabric as she dressed, and then she said, "You can turn around now." She looked small and lost in her wrinkled dress, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. There were bruises on her face that he had not noticed in the darkness the night before, a purple shadow along her jaw and another on her cheekbone. Seeing them made his hands curl into fists. "Did he do that?" He gestured to her face. Helena's hand went to her jaw. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing." Dalton poured coffee into the 2 tin cups he had found and handed her one. "How long has he been hurting you?" She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Since the beginning, since our wedding night. He was drunk, and I did not know what to do, and I must have done something wrong because he hit me. And then he was sorry, and he said it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again and again. It is not your fault. Everyone says a woman is supposed to obey her husband. Obey does not mean letting him beat you, does not mean letting him throw you out to die." Dalton sat down on the cot beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You cannot go back to him, Helena. I have nowhere else to go. I have no money, no family here. My father is dead and my sister is in Chicago, and I do not even know her address." Her voice broke. "I am trapped." "You are not trapped. We will find a way." He did not know why he was saying we, did not know why he was making promises he might not be able to keep. But looking at her, seeing the hopelessness in her eyes, he could not do anything else. "The Johnsons are good people. Mrs. Johnson might need help around the house, or maybe we can find you work in town. There are ways for a woman to earn her own keep, respectable ways." "And what about Malcolm? Do you think he will just let me go? I am his wife. The law says I belong to him." "The law also says he cannot try to murder you. Can I prove he did? I walked out into that storm of my own accord, did I not? Who would believe that he threw me out?" She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You do not understand how the world works for women, Mr. Ellis. We have no rights. We have no choices. We belong to our fathers until we marry, and then we belong to our husbands. And if our husbands decide to kill us, well, there are 100 ways to do that and never face justice for it." Dalton wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong. But he knew she was not. He had seen enough in his years out west to know that women had precious few protections under the law, and even fewer when it came to what happened behind closed doors. A man could beat his wife, could force himself on her, could take every penny she earned, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. It was considered a private matter, a family affair. But that did not mean he was going to let Helena go back to that. "Then we will figure out something else," he said firmly. "Maybe you could go to your sister in Chicago. With what money? I do not have $2 to my name. I have some saved up, not much but enough for a train ticket maybe." She stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do. Because no one deserves to live in fear like that." He met her eyes. "Because if I let you go back to him, knowing what I know, I could never forgive myself." Tears spilled down her cheeks and she brushed at them angrily. "I do not understand you. Most men would have already dragged me back to my husband and collected a reward for it. I am not most men." They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee and listening to the storm slowly wind down outside. By mid-morning, the snow had stopped falling, though the world was buried under drifts that came up to the windows. It would be hours before the roads were clear enough to travel, maybe even days. "We are stuck here for a while," Dalton said, peering out at the white landscape. "The ranch hands will probably try to clear the main roads this afternoon, but it is going to be slow going. I am sorry for the trouble. Stop apologizing. You did not ask for any of this." He turned back to her. Are you hungry? The beans are not much, but they are hot. I could eat. He heated the beans and they shared them, along with some of the hardtack softened in the bean juice. It was far from a feast, but Helena ate like she was starving, and Dalton suspected she had not been fed properly in a while. There was a thinness to her that spoke of more than just one missed meal. As they ate, they talked. At first it was just small things, safe things. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother who had died of fever and her father who had never recovered from the loss. She told him about her younger sister Eliza, who was only 16 and living with their aunt now. He told her about his own family, about the farm in Kansas that had dried up and blown away in the drought, about his parents who had moved in with his married brother, and his decision to strike out west instead of being a burden. But as the hours passed and the isolation of the little shack made everything feel distant and unreal, the conversation grew deeper. She told him about the first time Malcolm had hit her, about how she had made excuses for him, about how she had believed him when he said he loved her, that he would change, about how slowly over 2 years she had watched herself disappear, become smaller and quieter and less, until she barely recognized the woman she saw in the mirror. "I used to have dreams," she said softly, staring into the fire. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved learning, and I thought maybe I could help other children love it too, but my father said there was no point in educating me beyond the basics, that I would just get married anyway. And then Malcolm said the same thing, said I did not need books, did not need anything but him." She laughed that bitter laugh again. "I guess I should have known then what my life would be like." "It is not too late," Dalton said. "You are young still. 20 years old, you said. You have your whole life ahead of you." "Do I? Even if I leave Malcolm, even if I go to Chicago or somewhere else, who would hire me? Who would rent me a room without a man say so? I have no skills, no training, nothing to offer. You are smart. You are strong. You survived a blizzard and a bastard of a husband. That counts for something." He leaned forward, willing her to believe him. "Helena, you are worth more than you think you are, worth more than he ever told you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Something that made his heart beat faster and his mouth go dry. He saw himself through her eyes in that moment, saw what she must see. A rough cowboy with sun-weathered skin and work-hardened hands, nothing special, nothing remarkable. But the way she was looking at him, it was like he had hung the moon. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "I do not know," he admitted. "I just know I could not do anything else." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Helena looked away, breaking the spell. "I should try to tidy up," she said, standing quickly. "At least straighten the blankets or something." Dalton let her change the subject, let her busy herself with small tasks, though there was not much to do in the tiny space. He went outside to check on Smoke, who had found shelter in the lean-to attached to the shack, and was contentedly munching on some hay that had been stored there. The world was transformed, everything buried under white, the storm finally blown out, leaving behind a bright blue sky and bitter cold air. He knew they should probably try to make their way to the main ranch soon, but part of him wanted to stay here in this little bubble where it was just him and Helena, and the outside world did not matter. But that was foolish thinking, and he knew it. They could not stay here forever. Eventually they would have to face what came next. When he went back inside, Helena was sitting on the cot, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and he saw that she had been crying again. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, "about what you said, about leaving. And I think you are right. I cannot go back to Malcolm. Even if it means being poor and alone for the rest of my life, I cannot go back." Her voice was steady now, stronger, But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. Why do you care, really? You could have just brought me to the nearest house and left me there. You could have taken me straight back to my husband and washed your hands of the whole thing. But you are offering to give me money to help me escape. Why? Dalton was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words. I told you, it is the right thing to do. That is not all of it, though, is it? He met her eyes. No, it is not all of it. Then what? I do not know how to explain it. He sat down beside her, keeping a careful distance. Last night, when I was holding you, trying to keep you alive, something changed. I felt like, I do not know, like I was meant to find you. Like if I let you go back to him, I would be losing something important, something I did not even know I was looking for. Helena was very still. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and kind and stronger than you think. I know you deserve better than what you have gotten. And I know that when I look at you, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. He paused. Maybe ever. What do you feel? Like I want to protect you. Like I want to make you smile, really smile, not that sad excuse for one you have been giving. Like I want to know everything about you, every thought in your head, every dream you have ever had. He took a breath. Like I could fall in love with you if you gave me half a chance. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Helena's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Dalton thought he had made a horrible mistake, that he had scared her or offended her or crossed some line he could not uncross. But then she said, very softly, I think I could fall in love with you too. His heart stuttered in his chest. You do not have to say that just because I helped you. I am not. She reached out and took his hand, her small fingers curling around his work-roughened ones. I have been thinking about it all morning, trying to understand what I am feeling. And I realized that for the first time in 2 years, I feel safe. For the first time since I married Malcolm, I feel like maybe I am not worthless, not broken. You look at me like I matter, like I am a person, not just a thing to be used and discarded. Her voice caught. Do you know how rare that is, how precious, Helena? He squeezed her hand gently. You matter, you are important, and any man who could not see that is a fool. Then I was married to a fool. She laughed, and this time it was not bitter, it was almost real. What do we do now? Now we figure out how to get you away from him. Safely. Permanently. Dalton thought for a moment. When the road's clear, I will take you to the Johnson ranch. Mrs. Johnson is a good woman, and she has connections in town. Maybe she can help us figure out a plan. What if Malcolm comes looking for me? Then he will have to go through me first. I cannot ask you to fight my battles. You are not asking. I am offering. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and right. Let me help you, Helena. Please. She looked at their joined hands, at his rough fingers against her pale skin. All right. But I want you to know something. If we do this, if I leave Malcolm and start over, I am not going to be a burden to you. I will find work, find a way to support myself. I will not trade one man's control for another's, even if yours comes with kindness. I would not want you to. You are not a possession, Helena. You are a person with your own mind and will. I would never try to take that from you. Good. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face and made his breath catch. Then let us see what happens. Together. They stayed in the line shack until mid-afternoon, when Dalton finally judged the weather clear enough to risk travel. He bundled Helena in his coat again and lifted her onto Smoke, then swung up behind her. The ride to the Johnson ranch took over an hour through the deep snow, but the horse was strong and sure-footed, and Helena fit against him like she was made to be there. The Johnson ranch was a sprawling operation, one of the largest in that part of Missouri. Thomas Johnson had built it up over 20 years, and his wife Ruth ran it with him after they lost their only son to fever 5 years back. When Dalton rode into the yard with Helena in his arms, Ruth came out of the house immediately, her weathered face creased with concern. "Dalton, we thought you were lost in the storm. Where have you been?" Then she saw Helena. "Who is this, Mrs. Johnson?" "This is Mrs. Helena Lawson. I found her in the storm last night, nearly frozen to death. She needs help." Ruth's eyes narrowed, taking in Helena's bruised face and frightened expression. "Bring her inside. Quickly now, before you both catch your death." The Johnson house was large and warm, with a fire roaring in the parlor and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Ruth bustled Helena into a chair by the fire and wrapped her in quilts, all the while firing questions at Dalton. He explained what he knew, how he had found Helena in the snow, how he had taken her to the line shack to warm her up. He did not mention the details of how he had kept her alive, and Ruth was kind enough not to ask. But when Helena quietly explained that her husband had thrown her out into the storm, Ruth's face hardened into something fierce. "Malcolm Lawson," she said, and it was not a question. "I know him. He comes around town sometimes, drunk and mean. I am not surprised to hear he would do something like this." She took Helena's hands. "You poor dear. You are safe here now, I promise you that. Mrs. Johnson, I do not want to impose. I just need somewhere to stay until I can figure out what to do next." "Nonsense. You will stay here as long as you need." Ruth looked up at Dalton. "You did right bringing her here, Dalton. Now go tell the men we found you alive and then get yourself warm and fed. You look half frozen yourself." Dalton hesitated, not wanting to leave Helena, but she gave him a small nod. "Go. I will be all right." He left reluctantly, but he knew Ruth would take care of her. The older woman had a fierce protective streak when it came to those in need. Over the next few days, as the snow slowly melted and the world returned to normal, Helena stayed at the Johnson ranch. Ruth gave her a small room off the kitchen and put her to work helping with the cooking and cleaning, not out of obligation but because Helena insisted on earning her keep. Dalton saw her every evening when he came in from work, and each time his heart lifted at the sight of her. She was changing before his eyes. Away from Malcolm's shadow, she was becoming brighter, more confident. Her bruises faded, and she began to smile more easily. She helped Ruth with everything from baking to mending to keeping the household accounts, and proved to have a quick mind for numbers that impressed the older woman. "She has a head for business," Ruth told Dalton one evening when Helena was out of earshot. "She could work as a bookkeeper if she had the chance. Maybe even open her own shop someday. She is wasted as a cowhand's wife." Dalton knew Ruth meant well, but the words stung. Because he was just a cowhand, and what did he have to offer a woman like Helena? He made $30 a month and lived in a bunkhouse with 5 other men. He had dreams of his own land someday, but that was years away, if it ever happened at all. But Helena did not seem to see it that way. She sought him out every evening, and they would sit on the porch in the cold twilight, talking for hours. She told him more about her life, about her dreams that had been crushed, about the woman she wanted to be. And he told her about his own hopes, his plans to save enough to buy a small ranch of his own, maybe up in Wyoming where land was still cheap. "Would you take me with you?" she asked one evening, her voice very soft. "If you went to Wyoming, would you want me to come?" Dalton's heart nearly stopped. "Helena, are you saying?" "I am saying that I think about you all the time. I am saying that when I imagine my future now, you are in it." She turned to face him, her blue eyes serious. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Dalton Ellis, and I do not know how to stop." "Then do not stop," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Because I am already in love with you, and I have been since the moment I breathed life back into you in that storm." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that sent heat racing through his veins. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and for a long moment the world fell away and there was nothing but her. The taste of her mouth and the warmth of her body and the beating of her heart against his. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Helena was smiling. "What do we do now? Now I ask you to marry me," Dalton said. "Once you are divorced from Malcolm, once you are free, will you marry me, Helena?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes," but getting free of Malcolm proved harder than they expected. When word got around town that Helena was staying at the Johnson Ranch, Malcolm came looking for her. He showed up one afternoon when Dalton was out with the cattle, pounding on the door and demanding his wife back. Ruth faced him down on the porch, a shotgun in her hands. "She is not your wife anymore, Malcolm Lawson, not after you tried to kill her." "That is a lie. She ran out into the storm and I could not stop her. I have been worried sick." "Save it for someone who believes you. I have seen the bruises, Malcolm. I know what you did. And if you come around here again, I will put buckshot in your backside and tell the sheriff you were trespassing." Malcolm left, but not before swearing that he would get Helena back, that she belonged to him and no old woman with a gun was going to keep him from what was his. That night, Dalton stood guard outside Helena's room, his rifle across his knees. He did not trust Malcolm not to come back, and he would be damned if he let that bastard get anywhere near Helena again. But Malcolm was smarter than that. Instead of violence, he turned to the law. He went to the sheriff and claimed that Helena had abandoned him, that she had been led astray by Dalton Ellis, a cowhand who had taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. He demanded that the sheriff bring her back. Sheriff Thompson was an old friend of Thomas Johnson's, and he knew Malcolm's reputation. But he also knew the law, and the law said that a wife could not just leave her husband. He came out to the ranch a week after the storm, his expression apologetic. "Mrs. Lawson, I am sorry, but I have to at least talk to you. Your husband has filed a complaint." Helena stood in the parlor, her chin high, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Dalton stood beside her, and Ruth and Thomas flanked her on the other side. She was not alone, and she would never be alone again. "I have nothing to say to Malcolm Lawson, Sheriff. He threw me out to die in a blizzard, and only by the grace of God and Dalton's intervention did I survive. I will not go back to him. He says you ran out on your own, that he tried to stop you. He is lying. Look at my face, Sheriff. Look at these bruises. Ask yourself if these look like the marks of a man trying to protect his wife or a man trying to hurt her." Thompson sighed. "Mrs. Lawson, I believe you. But believing you and being able to do anything about it are two different things. In the eyes of the law, you are still his wife, and he has rights over you." "Then the law is wrong," Dalton said flatly. "And if you try to take her back to him, you will have to go through me." "Son, do not make threats you cannot back up. It is not a threat. It is a promise." Thomas Johnson stepped forward. "Sheriff, my wife and I are prepared to offer Mrs. Lawson sanctuary here for as long as she needs it. If Malcolm Lawson tries to take her by force, he will be trespassing, and I will defend my property. With respect, Mr. Johnson, a man cannot trespass to retrieve his own wife." "Then let her divorce him," Ruth said. "Surely there are grounds for divorce if he tried to kill her. In Missouri, a woman needs to prove adultery, abandonment for over a year, or that her husband is impotent. None of those apply here as far as I can tell." Thompson shook his head. "I wish I had better news, but the truth is, Mrs. Lawson is stuck unless she can prove something that will hold up in court." Helena felt her hope crumbling. She had been so sure that away from Malcolm she would be free. But the law, it seemed, had other ideas. "What if I went to another state?" she asked. "Somewhere with different laws." You would still be married, and if he found you, he could bring you back." Thompson looked genuinely sorry. "Look, I will talk to Malcolm, try to reason with him. Maybe if he knows you are serious about not coming back, he will agree to let you go. I cannot promise anything, but I will try." After he left, Helena sank into a chair, her face in her hands. "It is hopeless. I will never be free of him." "You are free of him," Dalton said firmly. "You are here safe. He cannot touch you. But I cannot move forward either. I cannot marry you, cannot build a life. I am in limbo, neither wife nor widow nor single woman." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe you should forget about me, Dalton. Find someone else, someone who is not tethered to a monster." "Helena Lawson, you listen to me." He knelt in front of her and took her hands. "I do not care if it takes a year or 5 years or 10. I do not care if we have to go to California or Canada or the ends of the earth. I am not giving up on you. We will find a way." "How?" "I do not know yet, but we will." Ruth had been listening quietly, and now she spoke up. "There might be another way. It is not legal exactly, but it might work." They all turned to her. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. "We tell everyone that Helena is a widow, that her husband died in the storm or in an accident after. We say she came here looking for work and we hired her. Malcolm might make noise about it, but if Helena is not using his name, if she is living as a free woman, there is not much he can do without proof that she is his wife." "But the sheriff knows," Helena said, "and Malcolm will tell everyone. Malcolm is a drunk and a liar. Half the town does not believe a word he says anyway, and the sheriff is not going to go around advertising that he could not help you. As for the rest, well, people in these parts mind their own business, especially if the Johnsons say to mind their business." Ruth looked at her husband. "What do you think, Thomas?" The older man stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It is risky. If Malcolm pushes it, if he brings in a judge or something, it could all fall apart." "Then we make sure he does not push it," Dalton said. "We make it more trouble than it is worth for him to keep fighting." "How do we do that?" Helena asked. Dalton's eyes hardened. "We make him an offer. He lets you go quietly, stops claiming you as his wife, and in return we do not spread the word about what he did. We do not tell everyone in town that he threw his wife out to die. A man like Malcolm, his reputation is all he has. If people knew the truth, knew what a coward he is, he would be ruined." "That is blackmail," Thomas said. "That is survival," Dalton countered. "And I am willing to do whatever it takes to keep Helena safe." Helena looked around at these people who had become her champions, her protectors. A month ago she had been alone and helpless, married to a monster and convinced she would die in his care. Now she was surrounded by friends, by people who cared about her, who were willing to fight for her. And she was loved by a man who saw her as an equal, as someone worth saving. "Let us do it," she said quietly. "Let us try." The next day, Dalton rode into town with Thomas Johnson. They found Malcolm at the saloon, already drunk even though it was barely noon. They pulled him outside into the alley, and Dalton slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. "You listen to me, and you listen good," Dalton growled. "Helena is never coming back to you. You are going to leave her alone, stop claiming her as your wife, and let her live her life. In return, we will keep quiet about what you did." Malcolm tried to bluster. "You have no proof of anything. It is her word against mine." "And whose word do you think people will believe? Mine and the Johnsons, respected members of this community, or yours, a drunk who can barely hold down a job?" Dalton tightened his grip on Malcolm's shirt. "I pulled her out of a snowbank, Lawson. I saw the bruises you left on her. I heard her story. And if you push me, I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. You cannot threaten me. Watch me. You have 2 choices. You can let her go and keep what little reputation you have left, or you can fight this and lose everything. Your choice." Malcolm looked from Dalton to Thomas and back again. He might have been a mean drunk, but he was not stupid. He knew when he was beaten. "Fine," he spat. "Keep the ungrateful bitch. She was not worth the trouble anyway." Dalton had to be physically restrained by Thomas to keep from beating Malcolm unconscious right there. But he let the older man pull him away because violence would not solve anything. It would only make things worse. "He agreed," Dalton told Helena when he got back to the ranch. "He is going to leave you alone. Do you believe him? I think he is smart enough to know that he has more to lose than to gain by fighting. But just in case, we will be careful. You will stay here for a while, and I will keep watch." And so Helena's new life began. She took the name Helena Lambert, using her mother's maiden name, and told everyone she was a widow from St. Louis. Ruth hired her officially as a housekeeper and bookkeeper, paying her a fair wage. Slowly, she began to build a life that was hers, not defined by Malcolm or any other man. And every day, her love for Dalton grew stronger. They courted properly, or as properly as they could under the circumstances. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and books from the general store. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride, patiently guiding her until she could sit a horse without fear. She taught him to appreciate poetry, reading to him from a worn copy of Whitman she had found in the Johnsons' library. 6 months after the storm, on a warm evening in June of 1884, Dalton proposed again. He did it properly this time, getting down on one knee in Ruth's garden with a simple gold ring he had saved for months to buy. "Helena Lambert, I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with the Johnsons and the ranch hands as witnesses. Helena wore a simple white dress that Ruth had helped her make, and Dalton wore his best suit, borrowed from Thomas. There was no minister available, but the justice of the peace from the next county over came to perform the ceremony, and he asked no questions about Helena's past. When Dalton kissed his bride, when he looked into her blue eyes and saw his whole future reflected there, he knew that finding her in that storm had been the best thing that ever happened to him. They spent their wedding night in the line shack where he had saved her life, now cleaned and decorated with wildflowers and candles by Ruth. It seemed fitting, somehow, to begin their marriage in the place where their story had started. Helena was nervous at first. Her only experience with the marriage bed had been with Malcolm, and those memories were not pleasant. But Dalton was patient and gentle, taking his time, showing her that intimacy could be beautiful when it was shared with love. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under the blankets, Helena traced patterns on his chest and said softly, "I never thought I could be this happy. I never thought happiness was something I was allowed to have." "You are allowed everything good in this world," Dalton murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They stayed on at the Johnson Ranch for 2 more years. Dalton worked hard and saved every penny he could, and Helena did the same with her wages. Thomas Johnson, who had grown fond of them both, helped Dalton learn the business side of ranching, teaching him about contracts and cattle prices and how to spot good land. In the spring of 1886, Dalton found what he had been looking for. A small ranch came up for sale in Wyoming, not far from Cheyenne. It was only 300 acres with a modest house and barn, but it had good water and grazing land, and the price was right. With their combined savings and a loan from Thomas, they could just barely afford it. "Are you sure?" Helena asked when he told her. "It is so far from here. We would be starting over completely." "I am sure if you are. But I will not take you away from the only security you have known if you do not want to go." Helena looked around at the Johnson ranch, at the place that had been her sanctuary and her home. Then she looked at her husband, at the man who had saved her life and taught her what love really meant. "Where you go, I go," she said simply. "We will build our life together, in Wyoming or anywhere else." They said goodbye to the Johnsons in early April with promises to write and visit. Ruth cried and held Helena tight, and Thomas shook Dalton's hand and told him to take care of his girl. "I will," Dalton promised, "with my life." The journey to Wyoming took 2 weeks by wagon, and every mile felt like moving toward freedom. Helena had not seen Malcolm in over a year and a half, and she had heard through the town gossip that he had left Missouri, headed south to Texas, or maybe Mexico. She did not care where he went as long as it was far from her. When they finally reached their new ranch, Helena stood in front of the small house and felt tears prick her eyes. It was not much, just a simple 2-room cabin with a fireplace and a loft. But it was theirs, truly theirs. No one could take it from them. "What do you think?" Dalton asked, sounding uncertain. "I think it is perfect," Helena said, and meant it. They threw themselves into making the ranch a success. Dalton worked from dawn to dusk building fences, repairing the barn, tending to the small herd of cattle they had bought. Helena planted a garden, fixed up the house, and kept the books. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had ever done, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. On their first anniversary of arriving in Wyoming, Helena told Dalton she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, and she laughed until she cried. Their son was born in February of 1887, during another snowstorm that reminded them both of the night they had met. Dalton delivered the baby himself, with Helena guiding him through it, since the nearest doctor was hours away, and the snow was too heavy to travel. When he placed the squalling infant in Helena's arms, when he saw the look of wonder and love on her face, he felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst. "What should we name him?" Helena asked, running a gentle finger over the baby's dark hair. "How about David, after my grandfather?" "David Ellis," Helena said, testing it out. "I like it." "Hello, David. Welcome to the world." David was followed by a daughter 2 years later whom they named Ruth, after the woman who had protected Helena when she needed it most. And then another son 3 years after that, whom they called Thomas for the same reason. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and the sweet chaos of raising children. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Dalton bought more cattle, hired a couple of hands to help, and built a bigger house with a real parlor and separate bedrooms for the children. Helena kept the books and managed the household, and also started teaching the children of the neighboring ranches, fulfilling her old dream of being a teacher in her own way. They had hard times, too. There was the year the drought nearly destroyed them, the year David broke his leg falling from a horse, the winter Ruth came down with pneumonia, and they thought they might lose her. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Helena back to Missouri to visit the Johnsons. The older couple had aged but were still going strong, and they were thrilled to meet the Ellis children. "You did good," Ruth told Dalton, watching Helena chase the children around the yard, her laughter ringing out bright and clear. "She is happy, really, truly happy." "She saved me as much as I saved her," Dalton said quietly. "I was just drifting before I found her, no real purpose or direction. She gave me something to work for, something to build, a reason to be better." "That is what love does," Thomas said, clapping him on the shoulder. "It makes us want to be better than we are." They also made a trip into Nevada to the small town where their story had begun. Helena insisted on it, though Dalton could not understand why she would want to go back to a place with such terrible memories. but Helena had her reasons. She stood outside the cabin where she had once lived with Malcolm, the cabin with the blue door, now faded and peeling. A different family lived there now, strangers who knew nothing of what had happened within those walls. "I needed to see it," she explained to Dalton. "I needed to look at this place and know that it has no power over me anymore, that I am not that scared, beaten girl anymore." "You were never just that," Dalton said. "Even then, even at your lowest, you were strong, you survived, you fought. But I did not know it then. I thought I was weak, worthless, everything Malcolm told me I was." She turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were not sad tears. "You showed me the truth, Dalton. You breathed life back into me that night, and not just my body. You breathed life back into my soul. You gave me permission to be myself again, to want things, to dream. And I will love you for that until the day I die." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, this woman who had become his whole world. "I love you, Helena Ellis, more than words can say." They returned to Wyoming renewed, ready to face whatever came next. And what came next was more joy than either of them had thought possible. David grew into a strong, kind young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Ruth became a teacher like her mother had always dreamed of being, opening a school in the nearest town. Thomas found his calling as a horse trainer, with a gift for gentling even the most difficult animals. As the years turned into decades, as their hair grayed and their bodies slowed, Dalton and Helena watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. The ranch that had started as 300 acres grew to over 1,000, one of the most successful operations in that part of Wyoming. But it was not the success that mattered to them. It was the family they had built, the life they had created together. In the spring of 1919, Dalton and Helena celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. They were in their 60s now, grandparents many times over, with weathered faces and work-worn hands. But when Dalton looked at Helena, he still saw the beautiful young woman he had pulled from the snow all those years ago. And when Helena looked at Dalton, she still saw the cowboy who had given her back her life. They stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and Helena leaned her head on Dalton's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "The night of the storm, all the time," Dalton admitted. "I think about how close I came to not finding you, how easily I could have ridden past, how different everything would be if I had. I think about it too. I think about how I was ready to die, how I had given up, and then you appeared like an angel in the storm and pulled me back." She lifted her head to look at him. "You know what the best part is, though?" "What?" "Every single day since then has been better than the one before. Every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days we struggled and fought and wondered if we would make it. All of it has been worth it because I got to live it with you." Dalton cupped her face in his hands, these hands that had held her through so many years, through so many joys and sorrows. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Ellis. The very best thing." He kissed her then, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as their children and grandchildren laughed somewhere in the house behind them. It was a kiss full of memory and promise, of past and future, of a love that had been forged in a blizzard and had burned bright ever since. They did not know how many years they had left together. No one ever does. But they knew that whatever time they had, they would spend it like this, together, building and growing and loving. Because that was what they had always done, from the moment he had breathed life back into her frozen body. They had built a life from nothing, had taken the broken pieces of her past and his uncertain future, and created something beautiful. Some stories end in tragedy, in loss and regret and what might have been. But this story, The story of the cowboy and the woman he found dying in the snow, this story had a different ending. This story ended in joy, in fulfillment, in a love that lasted through all the seasons of life. On a cold January morning in 1925, Dalton Ellis passed away in his sleep at the age of 73. He died as he had lived his final decades, with Helena's hand in his, in the home they had built together. Helena grieved, as anyone would grieve the loss of their other half, but she did not despair, because she knew that he had given her something precious, something that could never be taken away. He had given her a life worth living, children and grandchildren who loved her, and 41 years of happiness she had never thought she would have. She lived another 7 years, surrounded by her family, teaching her grandchildren to read and telling them stories of the old days, of the Wild West and the storm that had changed everything. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time on a bright summer day in 1932, at the age of 72, her last words were about him. "I am coming, Dalton," she whispered, a smile on her weathered face. "I am coming home." They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple stone that bore both their names and a single line. "Together in this life and the next." The ranch passed to David, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Ruth returned from teaching in town to help her brother, and Thomas continued to train horses on the land his parents had built. They all married and had children of their own, and those children had children, and the Ellis name became synonymous with hard work, integrity, and love in that part of Wyoming. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, the great-grandchildren would gather around the fire and ask to hear the story again. The story of how their great-grandfather had found their great-grandmother dying in a blizzard, how he had breathed life back into her and fallen in love, how he had fought for her, protected her, helped her become the woman she was meant to be, how she had taken a broken life and transformed it into something beautiful. "It is a love story," the grandchildren would say with satisfaction when the tale was done, and it was. It was a love story born in the worst of circumstances, tempered by hardship and struggle, but ultimately triumphant. It was a story of two people who found each other when they both needed saving, who built something lasting from nothing, who proved that love could heal even the deepest wounds. It was the story of Helena Lawson, who was thrown into a storm by a cruel husband and left to die, and of Dalton Ellis, the cowboy who found her hypothermic and breathed life back in. But more than that, it was the story of what came after, of the life they built together, the family they raised, the love that sustained them through 4 decades of joys and sorrows. It was, in the end, a story with the happiest of endings, because they found each other, saved each other, and loved each other until death and beyond. And their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their names and their values, who learned from their example that love is worth fighting for, that people can change their circumstances, that no one is beyond saving. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people can build when they have love and determination in each other. And on the hill overlooking it all, the two stones stand side by side, weathered by time but enduring. Helena and Dalton Ellis, together in death as they were in life. Their story began with a storm and a rescue, with hypothermia and life breathed back in. But it ended with a legacy of love that would never die, with a family that would remember them always, with proof that even the darkest circumstances can lead to the brightest futures. It ended, as all the best love stories do, with happily ever after.